All right. Hey, everybody. I'm just popping in for an update and reminder that I still exist. Um, you all are speeding towards the end of boot camp. I have about a third of the way there, and you'll be finished before the end of September. So it's probably a good time to start pulling in some thoughts about careers and things that you're enjoying and what are you going to do with your skills and things like that after boot camp. As far as assignments go, all of your initial, if you're following along, again, as I always say, we're going to go through all of this the last week of careers and code during career week, September 23rd through 26th. So if you don't get these assignments finished, it's okay. But if you are trying to follow along and you do want to have a head start before you finish, um, draft resume, draft LinkedIn profile and draft cover letter should be submitted by now. Anybody who has submitted assignments, they are all caught up. So if you don't have comments back for me, let me know and I'll take a look and see why I haven't seen it yet. Our next group meeting is going to be, oh, you should be done with modules 7 and 8 or finishing those up. So that's all the modules and now going into actually working on the assignments and starting to look for things. Um, That said, our next group meeting is going to be August 30th and 31st. So that's Friday in the evening and Saturday in the morning. Um, Optional, but recommended. And it'd be great if before then you have had a chance to look at some job descriptions, have your draft assignments done. So we have some questions to ask and have some ideas about, this is the direction I'm considering. I'm looking at these job descriptions. They don't make sense. Or it says I need to take this or I need to have this qualification. We haven't learned it here. How am I going to get that? Um, what other options are there if you're not finding anything, things like that. So if you spend a little bit of time before that, or we can just talk about interviewing mentors, whatever you want to talk about. And then there have been a blog every month coming from the desk of the career coach. So if you're not following on Medium, those are there. There's another one that I will announce probably tomorrow. And they're on all kinds of topics like imposter syndrome, where to look for jobs, time management, organization, things like that. Um, and that's basically all of my updates. I see something in the chat, but there's also a message from Zoom. Hold on. The times for the meetings are they're listed if you go into Canvas, instructional thing. There is a schedule under pages, but I believe it's 5 or 6 o'clock on Friday and 11 a.m. on Saturday. So I'm going to jump off and let you get back to coding unless you have any burning career questions right at the moment. And you can always schedule time for me either through my link from the website or through just sending me a message on Slack. So any questions before I go?
Chiming in, we are at the 2/3 mark of the program, right? And so with graduation right around the corner, you will be surprised at how quickly that flies. Utilize Laura while you have her, right? Because you get to the end of this and you're like, all right, I've learned everything I need to learn. And then you're like, oh, all of that career stuff that we learned in the second to last week of the program and all those assignments that I had to do. Now I actually have questions on them, or now that I'm out in the market, I want to follow up on that, right? So don't wait until that graduation date to get a jump on this, right? Careers in code, we only cover half of that in the 22 weeks. Last week or two, that careers part comes in really, really important. So utilize Laura, even if you don't know what questions you should be asking, that is a task on its own to throw into your project management and go, all right, what don't I know about the career process? What am I learning from these modules that I should be asking questions about? That's when to really take advantage of the office hours that Laura is offering.
Yeah, and that's a good point as well. When there is another cohort starting directly after this one, I'm more available. So since there is not, I'll be less available because there just won't be the everyday activity going on with careers and code. So I will still try to make myself as available as possible, but it's on to bringing in income other areas after this cohort stops. So there's another reason to try to take advantage before the end of this particular cohort. Uh,
Yes.
okay, one question. May need some help with resumes and cover letters. Yeah, so I just, like I say, request that you watch the modules first. So I'm not telling you things I've already taught and already said. Um, and then do your drafts based on what I have taught in those modules, and then I will give you the feedback, and then I will if you have I've worked with other people though who have other trauma blocks and different things, and they still have trouble getting started after they've watched the modules, which is totally fine. But I can't and don't want to start from scratch with every single one of you. So just ask that you watch those modules first, and then we'll jump into that. And you can submit the drafts in right into Canvas.
Jesse can't keep the two apart either. Canva and Canvas.
Oh,
Just we use them both.
exactly. Um, all right, awesome. Well, it's great to see you guys, and I'll.
I actually had a question. I'm sorry. So, do we need to work on like the final resume and cover letter, or
Yeah,
are
if
we?
you want to go for it. Like if you're ready to start submitting them and you want to have it ready, or you're going to networking events and you want to bring them, yep.
A resume is never really final, right? We want to think about them as final in terms of checking it off the list, but a resume is a living document, right? Because it's representing a living person, right? So the goal is to get to a point where you're confident enough with your resume where you go, all right, I'm ready to submit this, I'm ready to get feedback on it. But you may find 6 months from now, right? You're hopefully you're going back, you're updating it, you're adding your job to it, and so there's no such thing as a final thing, just like software is never really complete, right? There's always another feature to add. There's always more bugs to fix. There's always more. But final is in terms of shooting for something we're confident with is definitely a good goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
And how do I digitally sign my cover letter? Because I remember you messaging me about that. I just
Yes.
didn't know how to do it.
So there's lots of ways to do that, and I highly recommend that this is probably just a good practice for you to know how to edit PDFs. So you first save it whenever you submit a cover letter, a resume, unless there is not an option to, which is not common. You should be submitting them as PDFs, because if you submit them in any other format, they will change from what you submitted. So you may end up looking, sometimes people assume that you created some crazy looking document when really it was fine when you submitted it, but it came across wrong. So you want to make sure that you're submitting what you are intending to submit, and submit a PDF. There are lots of different free PDF editors. iPhone and Mac have built in things. So you just want to save it as a PDF and then use the draw tool or signature. Google has, if you're using Chrome, they have signature add-on that you can get for an extension. This is one way, but you can also, if you did it like that, then you're signing the doc before you save it as a PDF. But if you save it as a PDF, then you can just mark it up. You can even do it on your phone. If someone, unrelated, but if someone sends you a PDF and you need to sign it, you can do it on your phone. You just, so it is a good skill just to know how to mark up a PDF. So it would be a good exercise just to learn how to do that. But I use I use two different um, PDF tools in my different work. There's one called Kami app, Kami, that is really great for mocking up and writing and commenting, and I use that for digital signatures. It's free and it connects directly to your Google Drive. And then there's another one called PDF Candy. If you ever need to compress a PDF, turn it into a JPEG, add pages, remove pages, anything like that. If you end up in a job where you have to do documentation and you end up editing PDFs or something, PDF Candy is a great tool to use.
And after Laura hops off, I'll show you how to do it in Preview, which is built into the Mac. And definitely, there was a time where my realtor was like, "Hey, I need this document." I'm like, "I'm on the road. Like, I don't even have my laptop with me." She was like, "Well, you're going to lose the house unless you sign this immediately." And so there are a lot of like App Store, PDF things you can do. The Mac Preview app is really powerful for everything up to editing PDFs. But in terms of signing them or marking them up, it's pretty good. But I'll show you the tool that's built in as well, which should get the job done for now. But there are definitely reasons to get out of Preview and into a PDF tool that you really like, especially if you don't give Adobe any more money because their software is outrageously expensive.
Yep. Okay, great question. Um, Joe says uses Foxit. I think I've heard that, but there's a lot of them out there. But anyway, that's thing that I use and what I recommend that you definitely all do is actually sign your cover letters just to give it that personal touch. And with that, I will see you guys at the group meetings. Bye.
Okay, so I will quickly show you guys how to sign a cover letter before I forget. I'm gonna try and download a quick one. If the internet would like to load. Screw it, I'm just gonna do it on a photo I happen to have downloaded. So what you should be doing in your cover letters is write you'll write sincerely or best regards or whatever, and then you want to do like the enter button 3 or 4 times to leave a gap, and then you want to type your name down at the bottom. You don't want to sign it like underneath where your type name is, and you don't want to just sign your name because especially if you don't have like header on the copy letter or the cover letter, they may not be able to read your signature, right? A lot of people's signatures, they're like, who signed this? I don't know who this is. So put your line of salutations or thank you sincerely, whatever, comma, a couple enters for a gap, and then your name underneath. And then you never want to submit that PDF. You do want to sign it. So once you convert it to a PDF, and you can do that in Google Drive, you can do that in Pages, you can do that really wherever. If you open that PDF by default, on the Mac, it will open into an application called Preview. So let's just pretend this is a cover letter. It will work on a PDF. It will also work on images. There's a little hidden toolbar. So if you pop open the little hidden toolbar and go into markup, sometimes it shows as this little pen here. What you can do is go into this line tool and try and sign your name on the trackpad, but that is a terrible, terrible idea. It will look nothing like your signature. So the hidden trick here is, again, you have to go into this pen tool up at the top. You would think you would go into form filling. No, it's the markup up here. And then about right in the middle, and sorry, I can't blow this up on my screen. There's something that says sign. If you open that, you can actually see I have all of my family members' signatures in here for when I'm filling out paperwork for them. But you can go down and hit create signature, and it will say, do you want to do it on the trackpad, the camera, or your iPhone? And so your iPhone may not show up. Obviously, if you have Android, but if you do it on the trackpad will actually work pretty well. You can do it by the camera, and at that point, you literally like hold up a sheet of paper and you get it lined up on that little gray line, and it will capture what that little piece of paper that you signed it on. And that's going to be probably the best way to do it because you actually sign it with a pen and then like hold that up to the camera. And then the last way you can do it is if you click on iPhone, your phone will actually trigger and show this, and it says like new signature, and you can actually like scribble something on your phone, and you can see on my screen share, it just came up with that signature on it. So I think Apple's done a really good job of that. Once you get the signature in, you just click on the signature, and then you can kind of position it wherever you want. And there you go, your signature has been inserted. So obviously you would be doing this on the form, and you would put it between the sincerely and your name down at the bottom. But the markup tool, we also use this, the second or third week of class, where we like drew all of the rectangles on top of a mock-up to figure out where the columns are. This signature tool is really, really powerful. And I know that you can also do that on the iPad as well. If you have an Apple Pencil, you can jot your name down really quickly. But the signature is really, really powerful. They have had the camera signature option for a while. The iPhone option is actually the newer one, but this is a really, really powerful tool. Really recommend you getting comfortable with Preview. It's not great with like editing the content of PDFs, but if all you need to do is slap your signature on it, or like add a new page to a PDF to combine documents, preview can be really, really powerful for that. And again, if you don't want to go through that hassle, you can use the line tool here at this one and like try and scribble your name. But like obviously that does not look anywhere near as nice as my signature that I actually did on a piece of paper and then held up. So couple options for you there. Please don't start stealing my signature and using it on legal documents. That is forgery. Okay. Any questions on career stuff? Any questions in general before we kick off class content?
So you said we're not supposed to put a signature at like the bottom where we do our like cover letter? Like do we need to like sign it then type in our name? Like you know how you like type like Max Matthew and then your signature, or is it your signature then Max Matthews?
It's like sincerely, then your signature, and then your name typed underneath your signature.
Oh, okay.
So, and there's a weird cover letter format that I have to look up every single damn time I do a cover letter. But it's really any business letter. So it's supposed to be like your name, your address, the date, the company name, the company address, dear so and so, your cover letter, and then sincerely, and then the white space where you will put in your signature, and then your typed out name at the bottom. And then the last step you do is you put your signature in between the sincerely and your typed out name. But don't quote me on the order of that. Some cover letters are like the date first and then your address and then their address. I always have to look up what it is. If you just do like business letter format, let me share my screen. And it's one of those things that like you can find quicker in an image than you can by going to the website. Yeah, so it's the company name, the date, oh no, it's your name, the date, the company name and address, then dear, blah, 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 sincerely, the signature, and then your name typed underneath it. But the header takes up, yeah, sender's name, date, recipient's name, address. You can subject is optional, dear, blah, 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 blah. Your letter, sincerely, your actual signature, and then the name down at the bottom. I will paste a link to this in the chat. Yes, show the amount of space the header takes up is ridiculous. And it's like, honestly, no one's like sending you a letter as a reply to a cover letter, right? No one's going to be like, "Dear so and so, we think you're perfect for the job. Let me stick this in the mail and reach out to you," right? So it's probably a good idea to add your email address and phone number up in the header as well. That isn't a traditional letter format, but I do think that that can be beneficial. So it's probably a good idea to add. But also at the same time, like the most important thing for your resume is that it is all lined up, right? So it in my experience with resumes, text boxes are a terrible idea. You think text boxes are easy to lay things out, and then all of a sudden you have all these text boxes that you're trying to align perfectly. And the human eye is surprisingly good at figuring out when things don't line up, even if it's over by just a couple millimeters. So I actually recommend not getting fancy with your resume, which is ironic because my current resume is very fancy. And so I recommend don't go overboard with layouts. Don't go overboard with colors. Try and keep it as simple as possible. Try and lean into consistent bullet indentation, consistent all of that. Sections are really helpful, so you want to break your resume out into different sections. Just for an example, I will show you actually two versions of my resume. And these are on my website. So if you want to take a look at them, you can. The first one is like this textual one. And this is a website called Credle. which is a free resume builder. I really like it because the layout is pretty consistent. It's pretty easy to do. And they do have a couple customization options. If you are someone who loves design, this tool is not for you. This tool is for people who are like, I just want to type everything in and have the design done for me. And you can pick like 5 different themes or 10 different themes, whatever it is, whatever one you like, you can run with. So this is an example where layout, I think, is pretty consistent and clear. Everything's indented at the right level. I've got it broken up into here's my skills, my employment, my education. Pretty simple, easy to read, goes from there. The other one that I have is actually what I don't recommend anymore, where I went overboard on design, right? So aesthetically, this is a lot more pleasing. It's also a lot harder to maintain, which is why you'll notice I haven't updated this in now 5 years, right? Because there is so much design that it's a pain to go in and get everything to line up and all of that kind of stuff. So while if you're applying for like a designer job role, this may be a great option for you, right? But because I'm not really a designer, this for most employers, a recruiter would be like, I don't even know where to look at this, right? There's so much going on visually, it's harder to find things. And you'll notice things in here, like even though I said alignment is really important, the T in technical experience isn't the same gap over from the P in previous experience. And so when you go this design heavy, it's really hard to get things perfect compared to Credle, where when you're looking at this, you're like, all right, great. I see his name, I see his title, I see the skills, I see the education, right? It's much easier to find the information that you're looking for. So I will put a link to this in the chat. Credle hasn't been updated in a bit of time, but once you figure it out, I really like it. They do start to charge you if you do like multiple variations of your resume, but it can be a great starting point to kind of play around and see where you're at. Joe, I know you're kidding about the brick, but I actually do a trick where even though I will apply online for a job, I will also mail in a copy of my resume because at that point it's something printed out sitting on the recruiter's desk. You only want to do that if you're pretty confident that you have the office address to mail it into, which sometimes can be harder than you think, right? I'm not like applying to a job at Apple and just sending it into corporate headquarters and like hoping that it makes its way to the recruiter's desk, right? So, but if it's a smaller company, that can work really well. And then I think I've told you guys my in-person trick is I've got my business card, my cover letter, and my resume, and I paper clip them together instead of stapling them because the paper clip is heavier. And so it will actually stand out more when someone's like going through. And the fact that they have to remove the paper clip means they're spending more time looking at your document, which gives you more of a leg up because they're already thinking about like the physical nature of the paper clips heavier and all of that kind of stuff. So it really sounds like a hack, and it is, but sometimes that hack can work. Joe, yes, I'm aware a brick is heavier, but windows are expensive. Was there a question that popped up? I saw someone had their hand raised, but doesn't
Yeah,
anymore.
I do have a question. I thought you were gonna answer it when you showed us our resume, but you know how people have like an online resume, which is basically all the information from your document, your resume on like a website along with their portfolio. Like, what are your opinions on that? Because when I see other people make that, I'm like, oh, that looks cool. But then I'm like, do I want to make that? Do I need to make that?
Very, very good question. I think it depends, right? Like if you are applying to jobs, it's kind of a bad look if you're applying to jobs to be a web developer and don't have a decent website yourself, right? And so that is definitely something where I do recommend having a resume online. But I also think that it's okay to link to your LinkedIn as long as your LinkedIn is up to date, or to link to a website like Credle, where Credle, it looks perfectly fine online and it looks perfectly fine if you print that out and handed that to employers, right? So it really just depends. I do think it's beneficial to have both linked though, because I've had people go to my website and they read through the website version of my resume and they're like, wow, this is great. I want to go give this to HR. And they go to print it out and it looks like complete crap because when does a printed website ever look good, right? So you can kind of think of it as like an online recipe. Like everyone knows you're going to print out a recipe. So they have like the digital version of it that looks great, but then they also have like a print button right on the page. And if you click on that, it opens up a PDF that's the same exact thing, just laid out for print. So I think arguably the PDF, the printed out version of it, is more important, especially because if someone opens a PDF that's a resume, they're not going to be like, oh, this looks like crap. You know, they're going to be like, oh no, a resume is usually a printed thing. I get why it's a PDF. Don't upload like a JPEG or a PNG. Keep it a PDF because that way the text stays as a vector basically. But I would say prioritize PDF, and then if you have the time, making a website version of your resume is also a good idea. But also make sure that one doesn't fall like out of date with another. And then, Joe, before I come to your question, the last thing I want to say about resumes is everyone is going to have advice on your resume, and there will be some point in your career where someone says, don't put a picture on your resume. It causes discrimination issues, and you shouldn't put it on there because you're going to get judged based off of how you look. And then someone else will turn around and literally give you the exact opposite of advice of like, put your picture on your resume. That way, when they interview you, they remember who you are based off of the image that they on your resume. And so they're interviewing so many people a day, they will probably forget you. So when they're going back through your resumes, they will remember you more because your picture's on your resume. Okay, well, which is it, right? Like, what's the right answer there? And my advice there is go with your gut, because there are times that even Laura and I have disagreed on what's good for a resume. And I will like push back on Laura and go, well, why do you feel that way? And by the time Laura is done explaining it, I'm like, oh, I never thought about it that way, but I'm changing my answer. I'm agreeing with you now. I think that's the right way to go. So if you get advice on your resume, never be afraid to like follow up on it. Or if you are at the point where you're like, I don't know that I agree with that, I think I like it better the way I had it originally, go with your gut, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're not confident in your resume, you're not going to be confident in handing it over. And it's like you can almost smell that on a resume when someone isn't confident. So be confident about what you're building. Be confident in talking about what is on your resume, and then also be confident when you get feedback on your resume to ask follow-up questions or really understand why they're giving that advice, because it is not with resumes, there is not a right answer. There are things that most people agree on. You shouldn't have typos. Punctuation should be consistent. Layout should be correct and not indented at different levels. If you're using colors, you shouldn't be using a ton of colors. You should just be using a couple accents. There are some standard agreed upon things, but then there are other things where you'll hear someone say, put your address on your resume. That's the traditional thing to do. And that way, if they're trying to find you again, they know to look by Syracuse and you'll come right up. And you'll have other people say, don't put your address on a resume. There's so many remote jobs. You don't want them to think that you are limiting yourself to just the Syracuse area, and they're never going to contact you by mail anyway. And if they needed it, they would put it on their application. Instead, you should leave that off and make your phone number and email bigger, or even leave your phone number off entirely. I've heard a lot of different things there. So just ask follow-up questions, right? And go with what feels right for you. Joe.
You actually kind of graze on this quite a bit. Generally looking like I'm on the CS majors subreddit, and I'm constantly seeing students get ripped a new one for how terrible their resumes are. Um, is there like a general like layout or design that, or even based on like, generational or more focused like sub industries or fields that prefer things a certain way, as far as like the design and layout of the information goes?
I would say Laura should have a pretty good starting point for you in the resume module. And I know she has some examples there. There's no de facto, like, it's not like there's JSON for a resume, right? There's no agreed upon syntax that the entire web uses. So there isn't a here, fill this out and you'll be good to go, right? Some people, especially earlier on their careers, will focus more on the skills and what they have built, compared to people later on their careers are obviously leaning a lot more on their employers and who they've worked for. Um, I know my resume has stuff like employers that I worked for in high school that I now need to go back and like completely take out of off my resume because no one cares. My first job was selling beach tags in, my hometown. Like no one's hiring me because of that. No one's looking at my resume and going, "Oh, he started working at 14. I bet he's going to be a great employee," right? No one is doing that. So you want to spend time on what the employer is hiring you for. And a very common mistake that I see the industry changing, especially in technology, is no one gives a crap about where you learned it. They care about what you learned. And so there are people who will list out their like courses that they've taken and they're like, "Oh, I got an A in intro to computer science." And everyone's like, "Okay, so what? Like, what did you do with it?" And they're like, "Well, I did this homework assignment and this homework assignment and this homework assignment." And a lot of people hiring are like, "Yeah, but we know those are assignments, right? Like, you didn't go out of your way." And so what ended up getting me my job now almost 10 years ago was I went in for the interview and my boss was like, "Well, what have you built?" And if I had just said, "Oh, well, my final project for this, course that I went through was building Hangman, and so I built Hangman," they would have been like, "Yeah, that's a traditional like computer science thing, right? Like you had to do that to finish the class." But when I went in with my boss, I said, "Oh, I've built this attendance app that's based off of this personal need that I saw, and this is the technology I learned to build it. Here are the resources that I found really helpful. I can talk about the project, right? Which hopefully your capstones are like that, right? Where it's like, hey, I built this out of a passion. Here's what I learned while I was doing it. Here's how I stayed on track." All of that stuff, if you're able to talk about that, chances are you're going to be a much more attractive hire. So the same goes for your resume, right? All of you absolutely should be putting Hack Upstate Careers and Code on your resume, but you shouldn't be putting it on there just assuming that people will know what Careers and Code is. You should be doing a bullet or two, right, of saying, "Hey, it's a 6-month full stack JavaScript boot camp." Because those are all things that recruiters or employers are going to go, "Oh, boot camp is an alternative to a 4-year degree. We understand it's an intensive learning process. We understand the basics of that." But you don't stop there. You don't just do a description of that. You should also do a description of how did that personally benefit you? What did you personally do during that 6-month period? Yeah, JavaScript full stack, that's great. But I want to hear about what you built. I want to hear about the things that you learned. I want to learn about the things that you didn't realize you needed to learn, like project management or time management that you ended up learning, right? I want to see what you personally did at that boot camp. Um, And so the same goes for your education, whether it's boot camp, whether it's higher ed, and that especially goes, even though it sounds a little weird, to your job experience. Because I don't really care that you worked at Google. You could have worked at Google and been a complete pile of crap and not done anything for 6 months and gotten fired. And you just happened to slip through their interview process. Believe it or not, hiring's really hard, and that happens more than you think. So that's what I kind of want to see on a resume, is not just what your job description was. I want to see what you did in that. Yeah, Joe, go ahead and share.
Yeah, just I mean on this topic, I've been harassing IT for the past few weeks to try and get my foot in the door with their web development team. So they're a bunch of people got CC'd on the email chain, and one of the senior developers said, when I'm interviewing programmers, I'm looking for some key things: enthusiasm and tenacity. If you indicate that programming isn't interesting or exciting for you, and you're willing to ask the questions to get the answers you need, whether that's from your colleagues, code analysis, Google, or Stack Overflow, then you'll have a massive leg up over the other applicants who don't. I would much rather have a less experienced dev with these qualities than a more experienced dev that is burned out and unwilling to go outside their comfort zone. Adaptability is great, and knowing more than one stack demonstrates that you are adaptable to some degree. However, what you can build with a stack that you are proficient in is far more impressive than the number of tech stacks you know. 3, having a GitHub or GitLab portfolio with your own projects is a huge bonus, as it lets me see directly how you code. Having bug reports or issues that you've had to solve is even better, since it gives me a glimpse at what your thought process looks like. Coding conventions and consistency are a big deal when you're working on a dev team, so showing that your code is well formatted and easily readable is massive. If I can't figure out what your function is doing by reading through it once or twice, or your indentation is all over the place, then what I'm seeing is a massive headache for your future team members. There are a lot of resources online for building a portfolio, such as boot.devs, scrimba.com, and frontendmasters.com, and chingu.io. The first 3 are training platforms, courses, and the last is a Discord server that allows you to be matched with artists, project managers, designers, developers of a similar skill level to complete team projects and build your portfolio. 4, know how to use a debugger. I can't stress enough how important this is. The number of programmers I've met who can't use a debugger is astounding to me. There are a lot of times where a debugger will drastically decrease the amount of time it takes to identify and fix an issue. 5, DevOps knowledge are a big bonus, but not as big of a requirement. And then 6, project management and strong writing skills are also a bonus. I'll post this picture in the chat too, so other people can read that.
Just de-identify email addresses and the name of who wrote it. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, really great points. Thank you for sharing that. A little bit of that is dependent on the job, but not most of it, right? So some job roles are like, no, you won't touch DevOps. Like, we've got an entire different team for that. And if you do think you're going to do DevOps, you're going to do a crappy job of it. So don't even try. And then there are other companies that will turn around and be like, there's only 2 of us, and I don't have the time to deal with you deploying your code. You will do the DevOps. You will be responsible for that. You better know a cloud. You better be, you better know that because you got to do it. Two different ends of the spectrum there. But really agreed on all of that feedback. And something as simple as the indentation, you guys are probably laughing because you're like, oh, we just use Prettier, and Prettier does all the indentation for us, right? You would be shocked, and the guy said this about the debugger. You'd be shocked at how many people don't know Prettier exists, or they look at their code and they go, oh, it looks right in the browser, so I'm good to go, and they don't bother doing their indentation. Meanwhile, if I open a file and it's not indented right, I immediately start crying blood and message the person, and I go, I'm not reviewing this. Like, screw you, like, fix your indentation. Even if you are used to reading your code at the wrong indentation level, I am not. And so I can instantly debug something when there's a for loop that has a curly brace in the wrong spot, but I can only do that if your indentation is correct. If your indentation's all over the place, well, I'm used to reading my code properly indented. And yes, I use Prettier, but I only started using Prettier a couple of years ago. Up until that point, I was manually hitting the tab key and making sure everything was indented properly. So some really good advice in there. We don't touch on a debugger, although I am thinking about how we could do that. There are lots of types of debuggers as well. So the most advanced to set up is called a breakpoint debugger, where you can basically say, hey, this line of code, pause when you get to that. Literally break at this particular point so I can see everything that's going on. But you can debug all the way up to putting a console log in, right? It's the most advanced that I know. Joe asked, is breakpoint debugging the most advanced? It's the most advanced kind of debugging that I personally know how to do.
That's reassuring. I thought that was the floor.
There is well, and I guess it also depends on where you're doing your breakpoint debugging, right? Because you can do breakpoint debugging in the Chrome inspect tool, or you could be debugging something like our backend at work is, I think, well over 100,000 lines of code. And we can have one endpoint that's calling about 10,000 lines. And that obviously is a lot. And when something breaks for something that complicated, you roughly know where it breaks, but you don't know how far down it is broken, basically. And so a breakpoint debugger is really important in that, because I don't need to put in console logs at every single level. I can put a breakpoint in halfway down the code. And when it hits that, it will show me the entire stack trace of where it went to do that. So I'm going to actually leave myself a note to come up with an example. We will wait to do it in Node. That will be a couple weeks away. Actually, even less than that now. But I will figure out how to do an example of breakpoint debugging, just so you guys get an example of it. For your capstones, it won't be super beneficial, because breakpoint debuggers are only good when your code base is getting very large, but is still a helpful tool to know, just like testing was when Nathan came in. When was that? 2 Thursdays ago. So I will make sure to incorporate that into the curriculum. With all of that said, any other questions about anything job related or anything in general?
So what is a debugger exactly? Like, can you give me explain it like in great detail? Because I'm still not understanding what what's the purpose of it.
Yeah, so I would say don't get too caught up in exactly. Let me rephrase that. Don't get caught up in how to do it, because we'll do that in a couple weeks. But you're asking what is it, and that's a very good question to be asking now. So a debugger, think about how we've debugged our code so far, right? We write a for loop, we generate some HTML, the HTML is supposed to show up in the page, and it doesn't work. And we're like, all right, something's wrong here. Is it a syntax thing, right? And then we go into the console and we see if there are any error messages there. And if there aren't, we go, okay, well, maybe something's breaking at a certain step. So we go in and we put in some console logs, right? And we go, oh, the console log's working when we click on the button, but there's still no HTML showing up. Okay, let me put a console log in after my document get element by ID and make sure that that information is coming back. Oh, it isn't. That must be a problem with the ID that I'm using, right? That's an example of debugging. Well, a debugger is just a tool that allows you to do that without having to put console logs in, where you can debug by basically saying, hey, when you hit this line of code, pause here. This is this is called breakpoint debugging. There are other types of debuggers, but the breakpoint debugger is saying, oh, you would like me to pause here. I'm going to pause. I'm not going to run any of the code underneath it. and I'm going to show you what all of the variables are at this point. I'm going to be able to show you everything that you have in memory. I'm going to show you what functions were called to get to this point, right? Oh, in order to get the sum, we ended up calling a function called parse int. We ended up calling a function that said get number from input. And I can show you all of those functions that ran in order to get to this point. So that is what breakpoint debugging is. It's one of those things that is kind of hard to understand until you do it. But a debugger is basically just a tool that allows you to see the status of your code without having to put in a bunch of console.logs. And you can kind of think of it as, if you think back to testing, you guys started at unit testing with jest, which is, okay, I'm going to just test this little function. And then you went all the way up to end-to-end testing with Cypress, right? Which is the user should be able to click on this thing, and then get this out. The same goes with debugging. You can debug with a console.log, which is the simplest kind of debugging, at least in JavaScript. Or you could go all the way up to breakpoint debugging, which is saying when you hit this point, let me see a debugger and see all of the information that the computer knows up until this point. And so I will make sure that we have like a 30-minute lesson on debugging, and we can go through that. Great question in the chat. How to identify and avoid job scams or fake job offers? Really, really good question, because that has been taken off in the past couple years. I heard about a terrifying story. Someone interviewed for a company, went through 2 or 3 rounds of an interview, got the job offer. They said, oh, we're going to ship you a laptop, which is a very common thing to do, especially if it's a remote job. And then they said, just in case the laptop gets lost in the mail, please give us your bank account information so we can verify your identity. And that is something that's really terrifying, because it seemed completely legit up until that point. And they entered their information. Their bank account was emptied out, and it turned out to be a fake company, and they couldn't get any of their money back. Which obviously, when I say, oh, this is an example scam that can happen, you go, who would be dumb enough to do that, right? But what is also crazy about that is, if you are working in the US, there is a form you have to fill out called the I-9. And the I-9 is the employment eligibility verification. And part of that form is the I-9, and then the W4 as well for setting up withholding, is you need to enter your social security number, and you need to provide a copy of your ID and a list that's like your passport or your birth certificate or a couple other things. And shockingly, that is all a requirement that the employer actually has to do. That is not a scam. Why is there not some government process where I can upload those documents and then like give permission to my new employer for being able to access them? I have no idea. So I would say how to avoid job scams. Go local if you can, right? If there's a local company, if you can meet up with the person, that is really great. I would never accept a job offer without at least taking 2 or 3 meetings. If it's virtual, that's fine, but meet with a person, right? Over Zoom, have video on. I don't want to be accepting a job offer from someone I've never been able to see, whether that's video or in person. Want to do some research on their company, right? So make sure that they're on LinkedIn, make sure that their website is clear, make sure that you know what their company is doing. Make sure that the emails are coming from their actual email address, right? You would be shocked at the number of people, oh, this email came from hackupstate.com. You say hackupstate.com? No, it's hackupstate.com. There's a second T in that, right? Or their email is coming from, hackupstate.net and not hackupstate.com. Those little things, even though they sound really simple, it's so easy to forge an email and send it from someone else. So check your email domains. When you get a job offer letter, check the address on that job offer, and make sure the address is an actual office space, right? So if I'm getting hired by Facebook, I want to go make sure that the corporate address actually is an office, right? Go on Google Street View, and if it's just some random warehouse in the middle of nowhere, you're like, oh, that feels a little weird. And you can always question them, and they can go, oh, we're 100% remote company. We don't actually have any offices, so we use a mailing service. That's their address. Okay, well, if that's the case, look up the mailing service and make sure that that address is actually listed. So you should be getting a vibe. And if at any point you're getting a vibe where you're like, this doesn't feel completely right, definitely put your guards up, definitely go through more of that interview process, or the, fire back some questions at them. But no employer should be asking for your bank account information until they are setting up direct deposit. And when they are setting up direct deposit, ideally you're giving that information to the payroll provider, not necessarily to someone directly. And so one thing that you can do is you can say, hey, can I get my first check in the mail? And then I'll set up direct deposit after that. That's a completely fine thing to say. They mail you a check. It's a little bit more of a pain because you got to wait for it longer. You've got to scan it on your banking app, or you got to go deposit it, at the local branch. But if you're really worried about handing over bank account information, don't hesitate to say, hey, I'll just wait until get the first paycheck in the mail, and then I'll set up direct deposit. That's a completely fine thing to do. Trying to think about any other job offers or scams that I can think of. Be careful if you're getting hired by, there are a lot of companies that will basically hire you, but really all they're doing is listing you on a website. And then when a project comes in, the company will work with you to get you hired at that company. So you're basically in a network of developers. You get listed on their website, and then a company will go to their website, see you on it. You get like matched up to them, and then the company will take a cut of that. So they should be pretty clear about that in the job description if that's what they're doing. And they may come back and say like, well, the average developer on our website makes this amount of money. It's not quite a recruiting agency, Joe. It's something like
a contract company or something.
It's like an agency meets a recruiting agency. It's like halfway in between. And I'm trying to think of the, oh, let me see if I can find one really quickly. And I'm not saying you shouldn't work with them. It's just something that you should know that's what you're getting into. So yeah, okay, so here's a good example of this. And again, this is just the first company that I found. I'm not saying you shouldn't work for them. I'm just saying be aware that this is not a traditional job offer in terms of you get hired and they go, okay, great, we're paying you this amount monthly. So this is weworkremotely.com is a really good website that I have found I really like. I have found that LinkedIn and Indeed and Monster have really gotten flooded. And that causes some problems for like there's so many people applying to the job, it's really hard to stand out. So anyway, this is a company. First, check the location of the company. I'm not saying that international companies are bad. I'm just saying that first thing that I notice is that they are not based in the United States. So that's one thing to consider. Not saying that there are not good international companies, but keep that in mind. And then the other thing that says is like, oh, are you a talent senior developer? Okay, you guys aren't senior developer, but there are companies that do this for junior developers as well. We're a marketplace that connects you with hand-picked startups in the US and Europe. And then they go on to say, hey, the salary range can vary because until you get matched with a company, you won't know how much they're paying, where you're going to get paid. And then they say, we'll manually find the best project for you according to your skills and preferences. So all of this sounds like a great idea on the surface, but you may be applying to a job thinking, oh, if I get this job, I'm going to get a particular start date, I'm going to get going. And really what they're saying is we're going to interview you to make sure that you're good enough to be put on our marketplace. And then once you're on our marketplace, other companies will come to you, figure out if you're worth hiring, and then you'll get hired from there. And then you may even find that they will take a cut of your salary. And I know, Michael, you put in the chat about income share agreements, which is something that we have considered, and we've had actually something that we've done a lot of research into at Hack Upstate as a potential revenue source. So an ISA is an income share agreement, and the basic idea there, a lot of boot camps have done it, and we've got a lot of people who have applied to Hack Upstate who are like, what's the catch? How is it free? And the answer is it's grant money, right? That's money that has come from through Onondaga County, through Alliance of Economic Inclusion that has funded this cohort. So basically taxes are paying for you to go through our program. But an income share agreement is the idea of, hey, you don't pay anything out of pocket for your education. But once you get a job, based off of whatever your salary is, you have to pay 10% roughly of your salary back to us until you have paid off your education, which doesn't sound like a bad deal, but there can be some crazy interest rates on it. There can be some crazy high percentages on it. So you do want to be careful with income share agreements. They're not all bad, but they certainly can be, depending on the terms. If you make it through the program, some of them will charge you like a dropout rate. They can get really hairy. So just like this this marketplace of developers, I'm not saying this particular one is bad, but if you're coming in applying thinking that it's a job that with a traditional paycheck, that may not always be the case. Anything else you wanted to throw in there, Michael? Because ISAs are definitely something that should be aware of.
Just the ones that I was coming across, it was actually a lot worse than 10%. But no, it was a lot of things. Those were presented to me as jobs, but it was things that you find out if you look at the job. It's actually a boot camp, and it's actually so you're getting flooded with all the sort of fake job. You apply to a boot camp, and then all of a sudden you find out that you're on the hook for $40,000 somewhere or another, and you start looking at the fine print, and they're going to get their money out of you one way or another. So your only way out if you go through and you're not able to find a job, so that they're still getting 40 grand out of you.
Yes.
And sometimes it varies from place to place, but sometimes the income share is a really big bite, like 30% with some of them.
Yeah, and a lot of them will say like if you make it 2 months into the 6 month or 2 weeks into the 6 month program, that is enough to lock you in and you're on the hook for the full amount. But they reserve every right to say your grades or your attendance isn't good enough, so we're kicking you out, but you still owe us 40 grand, which is we have looked into ISAs. It is more regulated in New York State, which is I think a good thing for the students. For New York State, you have to go through something called the BPSS, which is the Bureau of Proprietary Schools and something. That is a long process that we are mostly through in terms of just getting our initial application ready, because we are looking at accepting tuition. But in our ISA contract, we've also made it clear of like, well, if you made it halfway through the program, you should only owe half of the tuition, right? Like that's and then there are also some clauses that will say even if you aren't making money or you're making a very small amount of money, we're still going to charge you a certain monthly amount. Which the whole point of an ISA on the surface is, well, we don't start making money off of you until you start making money. And some ISAs will say, we don't care if you're only making 10 grand a year, we would like our cut of that. And then it can get really nasty at the end because basically an ISA is a loan that says you don't have to start repaying until a certain point, graduation or yeah. So they can get really messy, but I'm glad you mentioned them. ISAs are something to be aware of. They are not all bad. Again, like this marketplace might not be all bad. Like all international companies are not all bad. But if you are always read the fine print, every company will pressure you to accept an offer letter. That is somewhat normal. What is not normal is you have an hour to accept this or we're going to offer it to someone else. So you should always feel comfortable going back and forth. There are certain job descriptions that they will come back to you and say, no, we can't negotiate, right? This program was a 3-year grant. In the only way that they could get the 3-year grant is if they submitted a detailed budget. So when I got this job, I went, well, Jesse, can you work with me on the salary amount, right? And Jesse was like, no, I can't, right? There's a certain budget that we submitted that got approved. There's nothing we can do. This is the offer, take it or leave it. And I pushed back and I said, okay, well, what about vacation days? And he went, oh, well, we do have a budget line for guest instructors. So as long as you have a guest instructor come in, you can take the time off up to a certain point, right? And I went, okay, great. And then I said, well, what about the insurance aspect of it? And he went, oh, well, that's a separate, budget line. And then I said, well, what about all of the licenses I have to buy for Zoom and all of that stuff? And he went, oh yeah, tools is another budget item, right? And so if you are going for a grant funded position, you won't have a ton of room to negotiate, but there are other things they can do. And that goes for a traditional job as well. They may not be able to move on budget, but they may be able to move on 401k matching. They may be able to move on PTO. They may be able to boost your benefits for insurance. There are lots of things that you can negotiate on. You can negotiate on, some companies are like, we give every employee a laptop. That's the way we do it. There are other companies that are like, no, we haven't really thought about that. We want you to bring your own laptop. And you go, well, I can't really afford that right now. You can either pay me another 2 grand a year, which is what you would prefer, or you can give me a laptop. I need a Mac. And they may go, oh, well, we'll hit up the IT department and see if we can get that for you. So never accept an offer without negotiating on it, ever, because they may come back and they may go, there's nothing we can do. Very rarely that will be the case. And you don't need to push your luck and you don't need to, be at the top end of the salary and say, this is what I want. But the worst thing you can do is ask and they say, no, we can't. And then at that point you consider, hey, is that salary enough for me, right? But Laura will go through a lot of this with negotiation, with how to come up with questions at the end of an interview that you should be going through, with a lot of different tips there. But these are all great questions. Even though I've already answered them, ask Laura them as well, because Laura has a different perspective than I do as an employer who is doing the interviews, right? Laura has a lot more experience coaching people on the interviewee side of the table and how to come up with questions and all of that kind of stuff. So these are all really great questions. I'm glad you guys are asking them. But if you're not completely satisfied with the answer, or you think, well, there may be more to that answer, definitely write them down, because they're great to ask Laura, either in the office hours on Friday and Saturday, or towards the end of the program in that career week. Okay, anything else that we want to ask, kind of general concept questions? Job related, curriculum related, basically non-technical questions.
I got one.
Yeah.
Do you approve of my method of I guess
Resume
just
delivery? No.
it works. On trying to, like, for lack of a better word, force my way into I guess the purview of the group or the department that I'm trying to like work into, because it's not like, I'm not even technically like adjacent to like the IT department, which is where the web development team sits under. It's not by department. So literally just essentially like cold calling or cold emailing.
Yes, I
Or is there
do.
a better approach?
Yeah. No, I think that that's a great approach. I know it's old school, but I love to try and get a coffee meeting with someone, or even better, an alcoholic meeting with someone, right? Of like, hey, can I buy you a beer? Can I buy you a glass of wine? Right. A lot of companies will be like, no, that's not really appropriate. Or some companies will be like, oh yeah, we got beer on tap. Come on down to the office and, we'll have a cold brew together, or a cold beer together. So I really love that approach of the cold email, right, or the cold call. To a certain extent, you don't want to get super creepy with it and be like, hey, I happen to find out that you work from home and you live in the DeWitt neighborhood. Do you want to go to Cafe Kubal together? That's my favorite coffee spot. Okay, that might be crossing a line there, right? But uh, coming in with a non-direct approach can be really helpful. Hey, I know that you're a developer, but I'm just breaking into the development field. I would love to hear more about your job and what your day-to-day looks like, or your 9 to 5 looks like. People love to be egotistical, love to talk about what they do. And so pandering to that can be great. And offering to buy them a coffee, or like doing it outside of the formal work setting, can also, I don't want to say catch them off guard, but can make them feel a little bit more comfortable about like, oh, someone's coming into this looking for mentorship or looking for advice. That's totally different than someone coming into it looking for a job. And so at some point you want to transition into the resume or a job opening or something like that. But you can do that in a follow-up email. I love a handwritten thank you note, for the same reasons I like the paperclip. It's something that you're mailing in. It's something that's going to sit on their desk. It's something that's going to make you stick out. So I am all for, if you have the opportunity and you can find their address, or even handwriting it and scanning it in. If you can't get the address, but you have their email, that's also a very valid tactic to do. And then in the email, you just say, thank you so much for your time. I wasn't able to find your address, but, I wanted to pass along this attached note. And then you just scan in the thank you note, and they open it as a PDF and can read it there. But if you can mail it, definitely do. That's like the next level up. Anyway, cold emailing is totally fine, but also be prepared for a lot of people to not respond to you, and that can be really disheartening, right? Of not, you lose your motivation because you're like, I'm sending out so many of these emails and people are just not following up with me, which is part of the problem with LinkedIn and Monster and all of those sites right now. Just go down and you hit apply, 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 and your resume is on file and your cover letter is on file and everything is like you're now on a list of 1,000 different people. So at bigger companies, it's harder to find the right recruiter who is like actually assigned to you or actually assigned to the job that you're applying to. But customizing cover letters is very, very important. The first thing I do when I am looking through applications, if you have not mentioned the company name that you are applying for in the cover letter, I immediately reject the application. If you did not take the time to read the job description, have an idea of what our company does, and mention that in your cover letter, I'm going to reject you right out of the gate. And most people won't have like a personalized cover letter to mention what we do. But if it is personalized to the point of including my name and the company name, that is really important to me. The second that it says to whom it may concern, well, I'm not concerned about you applying to the job anymore, right? I, I want to know, dear, manager at Tuzag, right? Or I'm excited for applying to the position at Tuzag. Full stack software developer looks like a great role for me because your job description says X, Y, and Z, which I love to do. And then you can have your entire paragraph about who you are, what your background is, why you think you'll be good in the IT world or in the software development world or whatever it is. That paragraph doesn't need to change very much, but if your cover letter is just the same for everyone you're applying to, I'm just going to deny you. Sorry. How long does it take for you to edit out and I've had so many applicants, believe it or not, I've seen this happen. I've seen people upload a cover letter with the wrong company name in it. I'm so excited to go work for you at Microsoft. Well, I don't work for Microsoft, so, right? Like, come on. Just update your cover letter, put the company name in. So those are my tips. And every career coach will have different advice. Some people will say, go for the bulk approach because it's so easy. So if you can apply to 1,000 different companies, at least one of them is going to get back to you. There are other people who, like me, I'm like, I want to know who I'm working with. I want to be in a small team. I do want to do that cold email. I do want to get my foot in the door because I'm a persistent mofo and I'm going to find a way to get in touch with you, kind of go from there. Yeah, case in point, right? It happens and you feel terrible after you've done it. But some career coaches will say, just apply. Don't put the company name in and do as many as you can. Other people will say, write the customized cover letter, go out of your way, be the squeaky wheel, and that will get your foot in the door as well. So just different advice and approaches there. Yeah. Yeah. Good notes in the chat. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. Do
Shoot.
you have any opinions, well, strong opinions about like an apprenticeship versus a traditional entry-level position?
I'm going to modify your question. I have a strong, man, you guys are on point with questions tonight. These are all great. So in New York State, the reason why I'm saying I'm going to modify your question a little bit is because internships play into that as well, right? And so I would actually slightly rank an apprenticeship slightly higher than an entry level position, um, which may be a little surprising. So I would say apprenticeship, entry level position, and then internship. And the reason I rank them that way is an apprenticeship means that they have thought enough about what they want to do and how they want to train you that they are going to call it an apprenticeship and realize that your skill level is a step below entry level, but they're still willing to take a chance on young talent for the ability to shape them to be perfect for the job role. So oftentimes an apprentice will almost leapfrog themselves over a entry level position into a junior developer position because they've had 3 to 6 months to prove and learn on the job. And so apprenticeships, I don't know the statistic right off my head, but I would have to guess that a lot of apprentices get hired, and they get hired because they're like, we've already worked with this person for 3 to 6 months or even up to a year. We know how good they are. We've already trained them on all of our stuff. We want to give them a job offer right at the end of it. That is compared to an internship, where internships may be something where they're like, we do these, we've always done these, we don't really train them, we give them some task that doesn't really matter if they get it done or not, but at least they get a little practice and exposure to the job industry. And so because of that, we aren't going to pay them much, or we're going to pay them in college credit. And New York State is pretty strict about, if you are hiring an intern, you do have to pay them. Or they do have to be getting college credit for it. So is an internship better than nothing? Yes. Does it still get your foot in the door? Yes. But you also want to make sure that they have thought through what it means to take on an intern, because there have been points in my career where I have taken on an intern and it's been super rewarding and they've benefited the company a lot, and they were paid. There are other times that my bosses forwarded me an email and said, hey, SU is looking for companies for these interns. And I'm like, can't do it. Right. Like, I'm swamped right now. I'm in the middle of a huge project. We don't have enough other people working. And I'm not going to be able to take on an intern and have them learn as much from me as possible. And so there are some companies that won't do that check, and they'll just say, we do interns every summer. This is just a habit of what we do. We're just going to throw you on this team, and whatever they learn, and whatever they don't is fine. Whatever, it doesn't really impact our business. So you do want to, in your interviewing process, ask questions like, what learning resources do you have set up for me? How many hours a week am I expected to be with my mentor, and being able to ask questions? How often do you hire interns or apprentices after the program is done? How often do you hire interns or apprentices? Those are all really good questions to ask. And then for the front end developer, there's overlap there, right? Of, well, how long do developers usually stay at this job level? In terms of, well, when do I move from entry level to junior, or how often do your juniors move up a pay scale? All really good questions. How often, and this is a good question for any job, what's your job retention rate? How often do people work for you for 6 months and go, oh my God, this is a shithole, I'm quitting, compared to people who are like, oh, I'm here for 5 years and you're supporting me getting more experience, getting promotions, moving up, all of that kind of stuff. It's important to keep in mind that the average person works at a company in technology for, like, I think it's under 3 years or even under 2 now. Uh, average. Uh, mm. giving me a percentage when I wanted it in years. The average turnover rate is 13% in the tech industry, which means that 13% of people hired leave in a year. So one says 3.8 years. Medium tenure at Google is 1.1 year, right? And so that's really hard to hear, especially knowing how much Google pays their employees, right? So it is entirely okay to get a job and be there for a year and get that experience and then say, all right, I'm not getting more practice. I'm not getting more experience here. It's time for me to move to another employer. There's something called the career lattice instead of the career ladder. And the career lattice basically says that oftentimes you can't advance your career by just climbing up. Oftentimes you need to advance your career by moving laterally. So in other words, I need to take a job at another company. I need to change up my job title a little bit more. I need to go somewhere else and basically sidestep to something similar so that I can climb the ladder over there, because oftentimes when you're climbing that ladder, you'll hit a glass ceiling and need to, again, step to a slightly different skill set or a different company in order to climb over there. So the general notion of the career ladder is not always just up. Sometimes you need to change up what you're doing, move to a different company in order to go from there. Yeah, any questions on that? Did I answer your question? To TLDR it, apprenticeships are great. Entry level or junior level positions are second, and then internships are probably third. Make sure internships are paid at some level. All three are better than nothing. So definitely consider that. And always make sure that no matter which of those three you're going for, you ask kind of support questions of, what's it going to look like and what kind of support will you give me as a developer who is on the less experienced side, who is looking to grow. Okay, I'm going to answer the leak code question in under 2 minutes, and then I will let you guys go. For break, not the end of class. Thoughts on LeetCode. So LeetCode is a website where they will basically give you challenges, just like kind of what we have done. Actually, quick side note, there is a quiz that over half of you have not done yet in Canvas. So make sure you go through that React quiz. Reminder that there is no penalty for submitting late. I bet you it will take you under 10 minutes to get it done, but it will be a really good benchmark for how well you're understanding React in general. So don't forget to do that quiz because I did have to give you guys some zeros for it, but as soon as you submit it, I will bump your grades back up to full credit. And now that I'm thinking about it, I do want to go on a tangent for LeetCode. So I'm going to give you guys 2 extra minutes on your break. Go on break, be back at 7:25. We will do attendance when we get back, and then I will go on a little bit of a tangent about LeetCode. So there was a question about thoughts on LeetCode. So first, for anyone who doesn't know, LeetCode is a coding practice and competition website, kind of, where you can, they pose a problem for you. You can code it out. I think some of the challenges are based in different programming languages. I actually don't have a ton of experience using it, but the idea is that like you get practice on it, and then you could even build up a profile on it. And then people can, like view how you solve the challenges, how long it took you, and kind of compare you. Is that correct, Joe?
I've never used it before. I see very It's sometimes condescending takes. I'm assuming what it is a very entry level tool for people to get acquainted with new languages and concepts. And there tends to be a sentiment among some of the more experienced developers on that subreddit anyway, where they kind of feel like beginners lean a little too much on that as being maybe their portfolio or something. Sometimes it's different critiques on it. I feel like sometimes it's just a little harmless dunking on, hazing the new guy kind of thing.
Yeah, so let me give a little bit more context on that. So let me take it all the way back out to like the 1,000-foot view, right? Of when you're applying for a developer job, you're not going to have one interview and be done with it, right? And so often the interview process for technical jobs in particular will start with what they call the screener phone call, right? And the screener phone call is like 30 minutes long at the most. They often go much shorter than that. It's going to be with a recruiter. And it's basically just a vibe check. Hey, do you have some experience coding? Are you a right fit for the job? Can I communicate with you pretty easily? Let me make sure I've got your resume and cover letter on file. Let me make sure that you know the basics about the company and what we do. Let me see if you have any really easy questions that I can get out of the way. And let me just make sure that you're a decent, you've kind of passed the lowest bar that we can set. Once you get past that, you will, and obviously interviewing depends company to company. Some companies you'll interview with will interview you over a 3-month process and do 3 steps of this. Some companies will interview you 2 or 3 times and you'll get the job offer within a week of applying. So it is very company specific. So normally what happens after that is you'll meet with someone on the actual team that you're like your manager. And so the first call is usually done by HR, and they may not have answers to technical questions, and that's not really concerning at that point. From there, they'll go on to your manager interviewing you. That is a better chance to ask about like what does day-to-day look like, what kind of learning resources do you have, all of that kind of stuff. And then they'll be asking you, tell me about a time when, or what's your greatest weakness, and what's your greatest strength, and all of those kinds of typical questions, as well as questions that they may have based off of years of experiencing where they find that you're a good fit or not. So that's kind of your traditional interview that you are probably thinking of. From there, you may do a technical test, and that's what I'm going to loop back to in regards to LeetCode. So the technical test, there are 2 different ways that they do them. You will either be handed a project and they'll say, hey, try and complete this in the next 72 hours. Don't spend more than a couple hours on this. But here's what we would like you to build. They may say, please build it in the language we are interviewing for. They may say you can build it in whatever language you're most comfortable with. And then you submit that technical test as usually a Git repository or like a zip of the code. Or they will say, hey, we're going to schedule a technical interview with you. It's either done by a third-party service that we hire to do this, or it's done by a member of our team. And you've got very little prep going into it. Haven't done attendance yet. The technical test, if it is live, whether it's done over a screen share or done in person, more and more is done over a screen share, but definitely done still in person. They will give you some problem and then they will ask you to solve it. And you don't want to rush into solving that technical test. You want to talk it out, right? Because oftentimes you feel like you're under a microscope because someone's watching your every move. But the benefit of that is you can also ask them questions, right? And get feedback. And sometimes technical interviewers will like stonewall you, right? And they won't give you anything. But oftentimes they feel bad for you and actually will give you an idea if you're on the right track. So you don't want to just jump in and start writing a new line of code. You want to show them that you understand, that you want to probe on technical requirements, that you may want to ask follow-up questions. And most of the time in a technical test, they will intentionally be vague to make sure that you can communicate. Well, that may seem cruel, but think about the job that you're actually doing. Your manager is going to come down and give you some task that he wants you to do, and you're going to need to make sure that you fully comprehend it and can ask follow-up questions. So they will do the same in the technical test. So a technical test could be something as small as build a little calculator in a website, all the way up to my friend works at Square, and their technical interview is build a hotel booking site for a hotel with 300 rooms. Can I do that? Yes. Would I ask a junior developer to ever do that? Oh, hell no. But Square actually gives you points if you've spent more than a quarter of the interview planning. And every team is a little different, right? But they don't want you to rush into this. They want you to plan out where you're going. They want to see that you've got some idea of high level tasks. They want to make sure that you're asking follow-up questions. They want to make sure that you fully understand it. And then they also want to see you using documentation or outside resources instead of panicking when something doesn't go as planned. So a lot in those technical tests to consider. After the technical test, or sometimes before, it just depends, they will do a team fit interview. So that's a chance where you actually get to interview with the other members of the team. That's less about asking specific questions and getting them right, and more about seeing, hey, if do you get along with the other members of the team that you will be working with? And then after that, sometimes there's a final interview round. But usually at that point, you'll get a job offer. Then you don't want to panic. You want to go back. You want to negotiate. You want to make sure that you're understanding the benefits. Then you will accept the job offer, which will have a specific start date. Make sure you always are putting in a 14-day notice with your current employer if you have one. And then a great thing to do is say like, hey, I'm super excited for the job. Is there anything I can do in the meantime before my start date to start to prep for some of this stuff? So all things to consider as part of the process. Before I loop back to leak code, does anyone have questions about the interview process steps? And again, don't quote me on that. Like, don't come back to me in a couple weeks or a couple months and be like, I just interviewed at this company and they didn't do those exact steps. That's just like a vague overview. Every company is very different. Okay, so go ahead.
Are there usually patterns depending on, like, do they usually run a technical test based on to get a good idea as to what you would do more or less on a day-to-day, or are they really trying to do test your textbook knowledge of foundational computer science concepts or whatever? Like for you said for Square, for instance, like, are they looking for this is a Square payment processing company, right? And then the web design and everything. Okay. Are they looking for more like design heavy stuff and like interactability, or is it just is it kind of like the same company to company, more or less?
Not the same, and totally depends on the job description, right? So some companies will say, we don't hire full stack developers. We hire front end developers or back end developers. So decide what you want to specialize in and apply for that. There are some companies that say we only hire full stack developers because we want to be able to give someone a task and know they can complete it from start to finish. Most companies once they reach a certain size, will split out their UI design from their front end and from their back end, right? Because it turns out that most people are usually better designers or better developers. I think it's so rare that you find someone that is as equally good at design as they are at code. So I call that kind of a unicorn just because it's so rare. But the technical test may or may not match exactly what you're doing on the job. So there are some companies that are like, this is the technical test we use for everyone. And it doesn't matter if you're a junior level or a senior level developer, here's what we do, just pass it. And we check a box and we don't read too much into it. There are other companies that will actually have a bank of 100 interview questions, and they will decide which interview question matches closest to the job description and the job level and give you that specific one. And then there are other companies that are intentionally vague. So our technical test is rebuild Twitter. Does that sound absolutely insane to say you've got 2 or 3 hours to go rebuild Twitter? Absolutely. That's why we give it as a technical test. I want people to come back and ask questions. I've never had someone do well on the technical test who didn't email me back and go, "The fuck, I need more clarification on what you want from me on that." That's why we do it, right? The other reason we do it is we want to see where you spend time, because if you spend time more in the front end than the back end, that tells me a lot about you. If you design the entire front end and don't do anything on the back end, that also tells me something about you, right? So we have people specialize in different areas. I had a guy build an entire authentication system from scratch, and that's all he got done. The front end was like literally a username and password field, but he had like layers and layers of encryption, and the whole username and password thing was really thought through, and he made sure there weren't duplicate usernames, and he set up all of the security, and I'm like, yeah, that's all great, but you could have spent 3 minutes dropping in a pre-built tool for that and then actually coming closer to the requirements that we actually ask you to build, right? So technical tests can be very varied, and different companies may be looking at different results from them, and so it's totally fine at that point to ask questions and say, hey, before I dive into it, this is my game plan, especially if you're doing a live one, you should do that. But then asking follow-up questions of like, hey, do you have a rubric that you're grading me on here? Because sometimes it's like, how long did it take you to do it? And are there only 2 things that I got to pass? Or are you just telling me this and saying you have an hour to get it done? Or is there something where you go, well, you've got an hour to get it done, but if you get this done, I'm going to ask a follow-up question, and then you get bonus points for getting that done. So it really does depend. Sure, you got a follow-up.
Yes, just real quick. Do they usually allow you to use like resources
Yes.
during technical? Okay.
I have walked out of a technical interview that did not let me Google. So they exist, but I wouldn't want to ever work for a company that forced that. Right? Because there's a difference between you Googling something and then being like, oh, right, it's splice that takes something out of the middle, not unshift, right? Like, that's fine. But there's a difference between like, oh, that and, oh, I forget the difference between the head and body tag, right? Like, so what you're Googling, I think, matters a little bit. And some of them, you won't even share your entire screen. You'll just share your code. And some of them have like proprietary platforms where you'll do it right in the browser as well. So anyway, let me circle all the way back to LeetCode. So LeetCode, the definition, their summary, is an online platform for coding interview preparation. The service provides coding and algorithmic problems intended for users to practice coding. LeetCode has gained popularity among job seekers and coding enthusiasts as a resource for technical interviews and coding competitions. So they definitely do have like a competitive side if you want to use it that way. In my mind, there is nothing wrong with getting more practice, right? And so Leak Code can be really good to say, hey, I know JavaScript. I'm looking for something that's super easy for me to gain my confidence. Give me a project and I'm going to practice with it. There's nothing wrong for using it for that. But I do find it interesting. You said, yeah, it's also negatively looked on that too many people will rely on it for its for their portfolio. I agree. I think that that is a concern, and I wouldn't say my entire portfolio is just completing Leak Code, because the whole thing about Leak Code itself, not the website, is this general idea of like pseudocode, which is, oh, I'm not going to actually write it in the language, but I'm going to write something enough that you can understand the concept of I need a loop here, or this is the data that I'm using, or something like that. So Leak Code, the problem is the projects are all going to be sized in an hour, right? They're all going to be something that doesn't take a significant amount of time to get done if you are borderlining on that entry level, junior level job description area. And I'm sure they have much harder challenges as well. But as an employer, I don't want to see, hey, I got a bunch of these little things done, because to me, that's the same thing as saying, oh, I did a bunch of little homework assignments in the boot camp. No, I don't want a little tiny piece of what you can do. I want to see one big thing that you can build with all of those pieces. And so Leak Code can get, basically what Leak Code, and I think what the concern of the Redditors is you are showing me that you can pass our technical test, but what you're not showing me is you can do the job after you do the technical test. Because the technical test is always going to be limited to an hour. The task that we give you maybe take you 2 weeks to get done. It may take you, several days to get done. And a technical interview and being able to manage a project that has a lot of moving pieces are two entirely separate things. So do I think Leak Code is totally fine to get practice on? Absolutely. Will it kind of push your knowledge and kind of build your confidence? Yes. Do I think that it is the sole way to get a job, and that if you only do Leak Code, you're going to be guaranteed? No, it's not the be all end all. There is something called Advent of Code, and they have kind of similar projects that start out a little easier. They're a little bit more algorithmic than they are technical whiteboarding interviews. But I really like that. I participate that in every year. There are 25 days of challenges. A new challenge gets published every day at midnight. I would not recommend staying up until midnight to do the challenges. There are also people who can solve the challenges in like 38 seconds, and it takes me like, I won't even say 38 minutes to solve them. Some of the challenges can take me an hour or two to solve. So don't try and do it competitively. It's just not worth it. But it is a really really interesting, because they present the data to you, or they present the challenge to you as a story, and that is really good at extracting the requirements from the story, and then there's no ambiguity in it, which is really, really nice. So there's no like, oh, but do they mean this or this thing? And they give you sample data, and they say, based off of this, and this should be your output. And that can really help you connect the dots to understand the challenge. And then on top of that, they will say, okay, now that you've tested with this example data, here's your input data. And the input data will literally be like 10,000 lines of data, to the point where you're like, okay, well, I would never be able to solve this by hand, but because I've been able to write an algorithm to solve it, I can also write an algorithm to verify the data and get the right output. So because this is a project week, maybe on Wednesday or Thursday, we'll actually do an Advent of Code together, so that you guys can see what the challenges are. The other really interesting thing about Advent of Code is it gets really freaking hard by like day 12 or 14. And I just tap out. I'm like, nope, this is too hard for even me. The algorithms get really math oriented, they get really challenging. And so I personally tap out at that point. But it is, I think, a really good practice for something like a technical interview. And all of the previous year's challenges are available. So the kind of cool thing is it's grown in popularity a lot. It started by a developer, I think at TCG Player. I know it's a local thing, and has now grown to the point where like Google and a bunch of other huge companies are sponsoring them. And people will stay up until like midnight and like really get intense about it. But because it is so popular, there's now a community of like YouTubers who will talk through their solution of how they came up with it, or you'll get stuck at a certain point and like be able to ask for hints. And there's a really popular Reddit for it, and even the Syracuse IO channel, right, from OpenHack, will post. We have a channel going for it, and we'll all post our solutions. And you can use almost any programming language to solve the problems as well. So the way they give you the input and the output file, you don't have to do it in JavaScript. You can do it in anything, and the output is always a number that you just type into the solution, and they give you that answer there. So lots of cool things that you can do with Advent of Code, and I think a good practice for the technical interview. So maybe that's something we'll do a challenge on this week, just to get you guys exposure to the technical interview. So I finally answered your leak code question a full hour and 10 minutes after you asked it. Hour and 19 minutes after you asked it. But hopefully, before Joe asks another question, is this helpful information to you guys, or are you just bored out of your minds? Interesting to hear? Okay. Joe, go ahead.
I obviously think it's interesting. On the note of
No, we aren't doing no this week. That's 2 weeks out.
Something that I've run into while being in a synchronous online school, or I'm sorry, asynchronous online, is in order
not us.
Yes, right.
Okay.
No lectures.
Okay.
In order to grade the code of all the students efficiently, they had to use CodeGrade.
Yep.
And wow, what a bane of my existence that is. But
it's like really only learning through free code camp.
It's kind of
worse.
It's very particular because it uses regex. It's very particular about the output, and it's taught me to really take a look at the project requirements and to follow that, because one of the things that they put out in the beginning was, to use this class as like, think of it like you're being given a task at work. You don't take creative liberties with these. This is what we want. Sometimes you'll get opportunities where like you're free to kind of, you got some wiggle room to move around with, but use this as like these are the hard requirements and you need to pass those exactly. I don't know how many times I have to like submit something before I get it right, because it will fail you if you have one extra space in there somewhere or an extra word in there somewhere. So not useful for every situation, but I think it can be useful for teaching how to stick to requirements.
And you'll notice that none of our assignments are graded that way. Those assignments that you guys submit are downloaded by me, and I open every script.js and scroll, skim through it. I open it up, I make sure it runs, I make sure there are no errors. I pop open the script.js, I make sure that you've met the requirements, and you guys get credit for it, right? And yes, I'm not trying to brag here. If we had 2,000 students, no, I wouldn't be doing that. You know what I would be doing? I would be hiring someone to do that instead, because your employer will never be grading your code based off of some unit tests that will run, right? And I'm sure if any of you guys have used Free Code Camp, you've run into that, right? Where like it is actually meeting the requirements, but because you added another space in or because you modified a file somewhere else, now it's suddenly not passing the test, right? Really, really annoying that they do that. But how many times have you also seen you guys go, oh, well, what's the difference between a map and a for loop? And I've said, oh, well, let me just code that out and show you that you can do it two different ways. Well, if you can do it two different ways, then why aren't two different ways accepted at Free Code Camp or wherever you're submitting your code? What will happen in the real world, however, is if you are actually working for someone, the version of submitting your code for it to be graded is called a pull request or a merge request. They both kind of mean the same thing. And what that basically is saying is I'm going to work on my own code in a branch in Git. And I know we haven't covered branches a ton in Git yet, but the idea is if you think about a tree, you've got the trunk. The trunk is the main code, the accepted code, right? And when I start working on a new feature, I am going to make a new branch. And I'm going to work on this branch and work on this branch, and it's completely separate. So if stuff blows up, I can chop that branch off and be right back to the code that I know is working. But I'm going to keep working on that branch, and the branch is going to grow out and grow up, and it's going to start growing up. And it grows up, and I go, okay, my branch is now done. I am ready for this to be merged in. I think that this code is the best it's going to be, and I want this to go out to my users. So you do something called a merge or a pull request to get that branch back into the trunk. And when you do that, that isn't automatic. So when you open up that merge or pull request, it also, you have to tag someone on it to review your code. So someone else on your team is going to check out that branch. Literally, that's what the action is called. And they're going to review to make sure everything works. And if everything works, then they go into what they call a diff, D-I-F-F. And they're going to compare the code that you wrote to the code that's in the main, right? In the main or master trunk. And they're going to say, oh, you deleted this, but deleting this is going to break something else. And they will reject it. And they'll say, hey, here's my feedback. You got to update this. So they go through, they review everything. And when they accept the merge or pull request, your code now gets merged into the main trunk and they are now back up together. And so that's kind of like asking to get your code graded, right? The first time that I opened a merge request, it came back and they were like, you junior dev, you don't know anything. This has to be changed. This is inefficient. This is going to cause a memory leak. They had like all of this stuff, right? And I took that feedback and made it better and re-updated and re-requested the merge request. And then they gave me more feedback on it. So it's very rare that your code is going to be going through a regex where they're like, we have exactly built the test that we know whether or not you are done this or not, right? That is a very naive coding school approach. And if you have to do it at scale, you have to do it at scale, right? Think about back to when you were in high school, right? Chances are you had to do a Scantron test at some point, right? Where you got the test itself, and then you got the bubble sheet that had the black lines down the side of it, and you had to fill in the bubbles with your pencil. Well, why did you have to do that? Why couldn't you just write the answer or circle it, and then open-ended questions you could write in right there? Well, because it took the teacher a lot more time to grade the open-ended questions or read your essay or see that you did all of the work than it did for you to just pick out the answer on a sheet that could be graded automatically, right? So that's kind of the regex of it, and why it's not a good way to grade code that way, because there are multiple ways to solve every problem, and there are ways to meet the requirements by writing different code. And so that's what I'm looking for when I'm grading your code of, hey, did they understand the methods that they're using? Did they miss a step that I put in the requirement? But our assignments are really crafted to say, we're not quizzing you on the specific concepts. our assignments are set up to quiz you to make sure that you know how to use the concepts, right? Quizzes and assignments. And so I think that that's what makes us a little different on that. I had one of the sites refuse my answer because I put style.css instead of styles. Yeah. Well, and that's kind of interesting because the computer would refuse your answer if you put style.css as well, if your file was called styles.css. But if they're like, oh, just put in a link tag, and then they're looking specifically for a name, you could easily argue that, like, well, I only have one style. This is the style of my website. Let me call the file whatever the fuck I want, right? Because the computer will let me do that. So it's all dependent on their grading. But the what I'm trying to get out here is, even though you won't be graded like that in a workforce after you get hired, there is somewhat of a review process. But that review process, while a part of it could be done by something like a linter that makes sure you're not doing something like accidentally leaving a console login, there will, in any good workplace, there will be a human review of your code, whether that's a QA department or another developer or both. Chances are someone is going to run your code. They're going to test your code to make sure that it meets the requirements. They're going to try and break your code, and they're also going to do a line level review of your code. And obviously, there are times where you're just rushing, you're trying to get something out quickly. They may rush the merge review process, but at any good employer, they will not. I've almost never heard of an employer doing like a regex test on your code, but a review by someone other than yourself on your code at a code level, at a testing and execution level, and at a requirements level are a sign of a good workplace and something that's very common. Yes, Joe, I would agree with that. Joe says it seems like Free Code Camp focuses on code and output, and Code Grade focuses on output only. So approach does not matter compared to the end result, which seems a little bit more realistic than Free Code Camp to me. Yeah, that's probably accurate. But you're never going to see a tool like Code Grade used at an enterprise level, or at least I haven't. So yeah, I would agree with that. Okay.
Yeah, God, I hope not.
Other questions? This is what this week is all about, by the way. This project week, and it's fine if we kind of theme some of these nights. So it's great that Laura came in, because that really spurred, right, 2.5 hours of job discussion, right? And that's great, because you guys have these questions, and you may not even know you have the questions, but you're really interested in hearing the answers to them. So that's what this catch-up week is meant to be. And then tomorrow, Ryan will be coming in to teach TypeScript. And so I'm going to give you guys an option. And then based off of the poll results, I'm going to highly encourage everyone listens in to Ryan doing the TypeScript class. He's going to teach you about what TypeScript is, what are the benefits of TypeScript, what are the downfalls of TypeScript, why would we use TypeScript. The industry steadily year over year has been using TypeScript more and more, and we're able to see that on metrics like developer surveys. It is entirely optional and somewhat not encouraged for you to use it in your capstone, but a lot of people will see TypeScript and want to try and use it. So I'm going to encourage everyone tomorrow to sit in on Ryan's TypeScript class and follow along. But we will do a poll in class tomorrow where we will split out and say, hey, TypeScript really isn't interesting to me, or hey, I want to go learn TypeScript. Based off of the number of people that vote for that, we will either go into breakout rooms and Ryan will do TypeScript, and then I will be on standby for any capstone questions or any assignment questions from all the way up until this point. So if you are like, I am so far behind on assignments, I just want to sit alone quietly, and if I have a question, be able to ask it from Max, or you can say, hey, I want to go learn TypeScript. The industry is headed in that direction. This is a really good opportunity for me to get exposure to it, even if I end up not actually using it. So we will poll on that tomorrow based off the results. We will decide if we're going to stay together all as one class or split out based off of the results of that. Wednesday will be another open class period for opening questions and stuff like that. And then on Thursday, I think we will try and do an advent of code, see how quickly we get through it, and then decide if we either want to do another one or you guys want to try and do it and figure that out from there. Next Tuesday, I believe, is Open Hack. So put that on your calendars. For hopefully being in person. I will try and remember to bring some rubber ducks. Don't quote me on that date, but I'm pretty sure it will be next Tuesday. Right, next Tuesday is the first Tuesday or the second Tuesday of the month. Yeah, so I think it will be next Tuesday. Okay, any other general questions before Joe asks a question about his React router? Okay. Joe, feel free to share your screen and ask the question. I would encourage you guys to start taking the React quiz. I don't think they're timed. If they are timed, I don't pay any attention to the timed answer. But that is a really good starting point. That quiz will give you a jumping off point for getting your capstone set up in React. So I would encourage you guys to work on that in the last 25 minutes of class, because if you have any questions about the questions themselves, now would be a great time to ask them.
Probably unmute myself.
I was
All
just gonna let you know.
The router ain't routing. Not sure why.
Okay.
And it was very late for my brain. And I kind of gave up.
All right, so I'm gonna poke around. Login reset, dashboard, router provider, my routes. Login is showing that, and login reset. Oh, and something was wrong with your Prettier, right?
Yeah, I don't know what was going on. Was in this one? Maybe, yeah, I think it was this one, and then it just didn't. It doesn't look like it's having an issue anymore. It wasn't stopping it from like compiling or anything. It was just showing up red.
Okay, so here is your problem. The link here, and this is good for everyone to see. The to path is not the to the dashboard JS file.
That's to the, I gotcha.
It's to the path in your router here. And so if we go to login reset, our router is not updating because it wasn't done compiling, apparently.
You were in login. That should have taken you to the dashboard. Well, you just changed that in. So if you change that to /dashboard.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry. Why is it taking so long to compile?
I don't know. You're in my React world now.
Well, I'm not having a good reaction to it being so slow.
Ha ha ha. Don't want to overreact.
Normal.
Oof.
Oh, okay, there we go. I got there. File. Oh, you got your files in iCloud, don't you?
Yes.
Not a good idea to develop code in iCloud.
Is this why? Because it takes forever to pull from.
Correct. Yeah. So
why is it in real time editing the file?
So code doesn't work well with any cloud provider, Dropbox, iCloud, Google Drive, Azure, any of those. It's because like it's trying to run the node modules files, but because there's so many of them, it doesn't do it efficiently in syncing them. So I would highly, highly recommend moving your entire My Code folder out of the
into
iCloud
GitHub?
folder.
I was gonna
Yeah.
put it in GitHub and then I got too tired and then I gave up.
Yeah. And you probably want to do separate repos to get it into GitHub. But I would recommend moving it out of iCloud as soon as possible. Maybe copying it and pasting it out of iCloud, making sure the code is running and then removing it from iCloud. I would not recommend moving it because we had someone tried to move their code out of iCloud and they lost the whole folder. So I would recommend copying it, testing the code in it, making sure it's still working, and then deleting it in iCloud.
Oh, could I just like copy it to like my desktop so it's on local and then move it, like drag and drop it into GitHub?
Well, you can copy and paste it onto your desktop, but you're going to want to set up separate repos probably for each project.
Oh yeah. No, I wasn't gonna pull the whole
Yeah.
Code file in there just for the Capstone React project.
Correct. Yeah,
that's what I've done so far for all of my projects. It's just I didn't get to this one yet.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, I would recommend doing that. And that goes out to everyone. If your code is in iCloud, it will only get worse and slower from here. So I would recommend not having your My Code folder or your Capstone folder syncing up to iCloud.
So I will go and move that real quick, but that should be it. I just need to switch those links there.
Those paths, yeah, I think that should do it.
And then was it? Nope. Oh, the referral section. That's what it was. Well, I'll get back to you once this loads.
Sounds good. Yeah, I would Control-C that server and then do the copy and paste, and that should fix a lot of it. I just saw there's something new in chat. Question about the app I use to push code to GitHub. Tree something. Yes, Source Tree is the app that I use to push my code to GitHub. There are 3 they call them Git clients that are really popular, at least that I know of for Mac. One is GitHub Desktop. I personally don't like GitHub Desktop because I find that it's too limiting, that it doesn't have like all of the features that the Git terminal has. And I think that that's very much on purpose. The other one is called Git Kraken. Get it? Git Kraken. They named it, not me. I just can't. One of our former students and program managers really likes Git Kraken. It is a paid application, but they were like, this flow just makes more sense to me. I did not understand Git until I started using Git Kraken, and they just made it so easy for me that I literally did Git Kraken. So that is another one. And then the one that I use is called Source Tree. I had a similar experience where my first internship was at AOL. I knew nothing about Git, and they were like, that's how we manage all of our code. And I raged against Git almost the entire summer and was like, this is stupid. This is complicated. I'm never going to learn this tool. I don't understand why anyone uses this. And I had probably 19 copies of my code on my desktop and was naming them all crazy things because I was trying to manage multiple features and copies and I was breaking things and it was a mess. and everyone was trying to teach me Git, and everyone sucked at teaching me Git, and I just didn't understand it until I started using SourceTree, and I started using SourceTree and have never looked back and always use Git for everything. The reason why I bring all of that up is because that I have found is a universal truth about teaching Git. Some people love the terminal and understand it in the terminal, and you put them in a UI and they're like, this is inefficient. I don't understand what I'm doing. Give me my terminal back. And there are other people who look at the terminal and think that it has 3 heads and don't understand how to use it. And then they pop open a tool like GitHub Desktop or SourceTree, and the light bulb goes off, and they're like, why would you ever use Git in the terminal? It just makes so much more sense to do it in SourceTree or in GitHub Desktop or in GitKraken. GitKraken does have a free trial. SourceTree is completely free and built by Atlassian, who builds Bitbucket, which is the 2nd or 3rd biggest competitor to GitHub. And they also build Jira and a couple other tools as well. Trello. So they're a really big company. So I really like SourceTree. I really recommend it, but it is a very opinionated tool. And you will find that other people like it and some other people hate it. So it's just finding the right tool that works for you. Did you have a question outside of that other than what is it, or what's your opinion on it?
No, I just wanted to know exactly what you said.
Cool. Yeah, I absolutely love SourceTree. Have used it now over for a decade. And I just find it simple and it makes sense. But GitHub Desktop is certainly simpler. And GitKraken has a much better user interface that doesn't look like it's straight out of 2002, which SourceTree does look like. But it's functional, so I keep using it. Floor is open for any questions. I will stick around for the next 15 minutes. You guys are tapped out. You are also welcome to head out a little early, especially if you get your quiz done.
I do got one real quick. I think this might be my first React project I'm uploading.
Sorry, Joe, before you do, thank you for the reminder. Attendance tonight, the secret word is SourceTree.
Space, no space.
Doesn't matter. Okay, and then once you're done with attendance show, you can ask your question. Thank you so much for that reminder. I totally would have forgotten. And then would have had to go to the Zoom reports, and it's a pain in the butt for me to do it afterwards.
You said source tree?
Yes.
Okay.
SOURSCE.
Yes.
Okay. I just pulled on how I usually put a project into GitHub is going into the I guess the root folder and dragging all the things. So right now I got things like package .json, I got the readme in there, the source folder, the public folder, and then pull that in there. Is that going to have any issues, or does it need to be only the source folder?
No, you should be dragging in the root folder for the project.
So it has one folder to look through, and then it goes through into that.
Share your screen. Let me see what you're doing. Yes, you are good to head out if you have attendance complete.
Here is the root folder. This is what I have pending to be committed so far. Is this stuff?
Oh, you're using github.com. You're not using GitHub Desktop.
Correct. Yes. Correct. Sorry. Like
yeah, that's fine. You're doing it correct that way.
Okay.
It is probably better to do it in GitHub Desktop, so it's set up so that you can commit and push instead of upload. Like the uploading way is a little hacky, but it does work.
Oh yeah, we kind of went over the hacky way first, and then I don't really remember how to do it the other way. Can I just go into?
You know what? Save this question for Wednesday. If not the iCloud part of it, but if you can wait, I will show you guys Source Tree on Wednesday if you remind me, just as an alternative to GitHub Desktop.
Pretty good one. I was having an issue where some of the files would maybe it'll do it now. No, of course not, because everybody's watching. I think it has to do with me renaming it in GitHub at some point. And it was conflicting with the name that's stored in the local GitHub file, and it kept pushing me to go locate the folder again. And then it would be fine if I selected the folder was supposed to be. But I think I got it all set. I renamed the folder that's stored locally.
Cool. The only other thing I would say is it looks like that Capstone React on your desktop is still syncing to iCloud. So you may need to turn off iCloud sync on your desktop.
This should be fine because I'm going to get rid of this. I just copied this over from what was stored in iCloud, and this is on my desktop now. So
Yeah, but it has a little cloud icon next to it. That means it's on iCloud.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if I'm going to use GitHub stuff, right?
No, the problem is that anything syncing to iCloud is massively slowing down the project.
Right, but I'm not running it off of that folder.
When you open it and run it local, where are you running it off of?
Like this. We'll go into here and
yeah,
add
but
a new
those
folder.
files are still on your computer.
The GitHub folder is not in iCloud. The
Yeah, so
GitHub
what I'm
folder
saying is when the GitHub folder is sitting on your desktop, right?
uh locally in users / Joseph Smith, whatever the file thing is.
So when you run it on your computer, whether it's in GitHub or not, if it is in a source that is syncing with iCloud, it will be very slow.
Oh, so I see what you're saying. So I should go make sure that the GitHub folder is
Not getting
'Cause
synced
that-
with iCloud. Correct.
because that folder originated from the C6 MyCode folder, not the GitHub folder. So let me go make sure that's not something.
But if C6 MyCode is on the desktop and the desktop is syncing, you'll still have that problem.
Okay, lifelong Windows user. How do I ensure that the documents tab is not the documents tab that's in iCloud? It is instead in local.
Bring your system settings over. Yeah. I deal with this every cohort. And I always forget what it is. Let me request remote. GitHub is in your documents. So I think there's a way to do a no sync iCloud. Copy workflow files and then open privacy and security. So I think what you have to do is if you go system settings, can you drag that over for me too?
Yeah.
Thank you. Here, drive. Damn it, where do they move that to?
Is this, can it be done by specific folders or does it have to be done? Is it either on or off?
To the file or directory name. So this is where I get really finicky because if I did this, someone lost their code last time. So I'm gonna copy this and go to, from is everything in this is synced. Right click.
If you're gonna copy that, some of those still have node modules in them.
Let me do this. Rename, and you're supposed to be able to say no sync. And that did not work.
Was there a way that I was supposed to do it that I did it wrong? Or is this just
Well,
what happens?
I can turn off your documents from syncing entirely, but then that will do everything.
Right.
Like,
did I do something wrong when we were setting up our initial folders for, I mean,
No.
I know everybody had stuff on their desktop. I just put it in.
No, the only thing that you did wrong, so to speak, is that you chose to sync your documents folder to iCloud, which is a fine thing to do. But they just don't make it easy for you to do it at a folder level.
I see what
So
you're saying.
I think I'm gonna do it.
There's no local directory like there is on Windows. I mean, I know Windows doesn't have like OneDrive integration like that, but
Oh, they do. They've made it as complicated as this. So I'm gonna do iCloud no sync and just use this utility. Nope. This utility. You can install it with this. And then added action.
do I need to give it permission?
Not yet. Finder. From Open Finder. Check iCloud no sync for quick actions. Quick action, privacy and security.
Is it under Dev Tools?
Extension. Oh. That did not work. Okay. Try and do it manually. For cloning, navigate to the repositories directory and then open install. iCloud, no sync, utils, source, install, ZSH. iCloud, no sync, and iCloud, sync, quick actions. Oh, there it is. Did I just not scroll on that? No, I don't think it worked last time. Okay, now, you can right click on GitHub and tell that sucker to not sync.
So where does the problem occur when it's trying to sync in real time as I'm editing the code, or
It has a problem with syncing anything that has node modules in it.
gotcha. So now that I have everything in GitHub and that has no
No
sync
sync
on
applied
it,
to it.
it'll
Now,
just
if
continue to pull without
pull-
without an issue. Like I can
Yes.
pull and edit and everything without it bogging
Yeah.
down the entire system.
So if we go back to your React code, I think you're going to find that this is,
You gotta reinstall Node. I deleted it.
yeah, look at how much faster that is. And then,
It didn't save because everything was erroring out. So that one's the dashboard one. And I don't need to put the file extension in there for the root either.
no, because there's no file extension in the path in app.js.
Oh,
So you're
gotcha.
literally putting this exact string in.
Right.
And notice how quickly it reset, and now it's working.
Hey. Cool stuff. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so two things I need to show you guys on Wednesday are the iCloud no sync and source tree. And then I also promised that I would show you guys breakpoint debugging. Is there anything else I promised? Oh, Advent of Code Friday or Thursday. Or maybe earlier, we'll see. All right, let's call for questions. Beautiful. I will see you all tomorrow.